would dwarf anything that he would get from firing Powell and lowering interest rates, even if he was given the authority to do that.
What we talked about last week is that the DGAF version of Trump is that much more scarier than the version of Trump that we've been dealing with, right? And what makes Trump so difficult in this world, this DGAF world, I don't know if you can hear my dog defending us from the UPS guy, who I went to middle school with, by the way. The poor guy puts up with the dog so well. But anyway, the DGAF version of Trump is scary because usually with a politician, including Trump most of the time, you can predict their actions when you understand their incentives. What you can't really do with Trump is psychoanalyze him and figure out what he's going to do next based on whatever's going on upstairs. But you can usually pretty well figure out what his incentives are. And if Trump is non-responsive to economic trends or political trends, like basically his popularity or really his legacy, because, you know, he's not going to run for a third term no matter what he says. If he's unresponsive to those things, how do you respond to the guy? How do you resist him? How do you work around him? It is very frightening.
Yeah. The other piece of evidence here that maybe like the laws of gravity apply to Trump is some polling that just came out. And I think this is related, right? Like the economy is related to Trump's ego. Polling is part of his ego too. Like he wants, you know, he wants to be loved. He particularly cares about the MAGA base, which I think like is pretty durable. But you're even seeing some backsliding from Trump in latest polls among Republicans. But more worrisome for him is for everything that's happened. We've already talked about on this podcast that he was underperforming on the economy. He was underwater on the economy as of the past few weeks. But now we're getting polls, multiple polls today coming out in the past 24 hours that show that his approval rating on immigration is underwater. And that is a first. Deal. That is a first.
I mean, the dude came down the escalator and made stuff up about Mexicans. I mean, like it has been the center of his identity, you know, politically since, I mean, and honestly, even before that, if you think about the way he talked about politics, there's been two things really at the center of his political identity going back to before he was a politician to when he was a Democrat to all that stuff. One was protectionism, which we're seeing run amok right now. And then two, is sort of anti-immigration stuff, which came a little later in his rhetoric, but has always been. And some, I guess it came at the same time if you see it as just flat racism, which he was engaging in, like with the Central Park kids and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, if that is starting to be problematic for him, that is a canary in the coal mine.
Yeah, and one part of this, what could be happening here. Well, let me take a step back on that part. We've been told by a lot of people, including I listened to Hacks on Tap. My former boss, David Axelrod, friend of the pod, has been on this pod before. Axon Murphy and Heinelman were talking about this Abrego case, which we're going to talk about in a second, over the past few weeks. And essentially we're saying, stay on message, talk about the economy. This is, you know, on Trump's turf. And I think this is a lesson for us that if we're right about something and it's moral, full stop, it's important to talk about it. And we can't be political operatives every single day, right? We can't be like, where's the polling going on this issue? If it's wrong, it's wrong. If we're right, we're right. We should talk about it.
Well, sometimes you have to win an argument.
That's the second part. Yeah. Convince people that you're right. And I think in this case, we have been convincing people. And I'm proud of the coalition in general. I wish we saw more electeds talking about this, but you know, podcasters like Tim Miller, who are hardly super liberal, but are part of our coalition, but talking about this every single day.
For those who don't know, Tim Miller ran Jeb Bush's presidential campaign.
Yeah. Talking about this every single day, right? And then you had Van Hollen going down there, and you know, as frustrating as people at Rogan are, and we're going to get to some clips later on about his podcast, even he came around on this. Let's go to a clip from this week of him talking about due process.
About due process. No, fuck that. But here's the problem with fuck that. The problem with things that are going in a radical direction, and then there's an overcorrection. So the overcorrection is lack of due process. The overcorrection is like round them all up, ship them to jail. Like, that's like some things that you say when you're not thinking things through. Like, what do you do about all the criminals? Take them all, fucking send them to El Salvador.
Yeah.
What about due process? No, fuck that. But here's the problem with fuck that. What if you are an enemy of, let's not say any current president. Let's pretend we got a new president, totally new guy in 2028. And this is a common practice now of just rounding up gang members with no due process and shipping them to El Salvador. You're a gang member. No, I'm not. Prove it. What? I got to
what?
go to court. No,
Yeah.
no due process.
That's
Right?
dangerous, Joe.
That's dangerous.
dangerous.
That's
man.
dangerous. That's dangerous. We got to be careful that we don't become monsters while we're fighting monsters. I think due process exists for a reason, and the reason is it is horrific for someone to be accused of something they didn't do, be imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit, and then live in a cell, live in a cage with a bunch of
People who did commit shit.
Here it is, Benjamin Franklin. It's better 100 guilty persons should escape than one innocent person should suffer. That is wisdom
Yeah.
that has survived hundreds of years. It's incredibly accurate, and it is the foundation of freedom. Like, we have to make sure that these people are actually guilty, otherwise we become monsters. You can't, like, what is that? When you fight monsters, be careful that you don't become one.
Become one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very important. It's very important. You know, you can't do that. You know, it's one of those things where to support one side of this, you have to deny some like basic human values. Either way, like to support just rounding people up and just assuming they're all gang members. I'm not saying they're doing that, but this is the worst case scenario, right?
Yeah.
They get a bunch of people in a room, they rope them all in, and one guy's just someone's cousin picking someone up to give him a ride home. That's possible.
And now you're back on the one innocent person now you're right back.
And what
with
if that dude is not doing anything wrong and he's got some stupid tattoos and they decide that this guy's a gang member, and now you're in a prison in El Salvador and you're not even from El Salvador. And now, you know, you were just a hairdresser or you were just a tattoo artist or
Family
whatever
man,
you are.
yeah.
You know, you came over here and maybe you got a green card and maybe you don't. Maybe you were just given asylum, because a lot of people from Venezuela were given asylum in America.
Yeah.
And then you get shipped to El Salvador where you're not even from El Salvador. So that the fact that exists scares the shit out of me.
Okay, here's why this is exciting to me. I have had this little glimmer of hope ever since. I mean, this little thing that I've hung on to, you know, in 2016 when Trump won, and then again in 2024 when Trump won. And this was the idea that if there's a silver lining, a saving grace out of all this, it means that maybe there's a larger portion of the American voting electorate that is persuadable than we realize. You know, that's what I keep coming back to, is this idea that if there are people who could be persuaded by things, even things that you and I and the people listening are fully against, that means they can also possibly be persuaded in the other direction. And that's what I've tried to hold on to. And then you got to ask yourself, okay, if we want to persuade people back in the other direction, what are the outlets that we're going to use? How are we going to penetrate and get through to those folks? And the answer to that is quite clearly not Fox News. It's not Newsmax. It is definitely not, Charlie Kirk or Ben Shapiro. Why? Because those actors in the system are basically politicians, because they are beholden to a group of people who will only continue to listen to them if they say a certain thing. So the people who become the vehicle to get to the persuadable people are the folks like Rogan, who didn't come into their position of power because they espoused a certain thing. They started espousing a certain thing because after they were being followed by other people, after people were interested in what they had to say. And we know, like, Rogan has been a Bernie supporter in the past, right? And that means, it gives me hope that if there is a channel to reach persuadable people, and those channels continue to be persuadable as individuals, then that's exciting. I'm going to stop. I have a second thought on this, but you talk.
Well, and we're going to talk more about this later in the show, but you have to think about, okay, like, you have to play on what got folks to this point in the first place, right? So what is it about Rogan and some of the people we'll talk about that got them to this place? It's this contrarian nature, right? So how do we play to that contrarian